Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of The Other Leg, Andy's Music Vault. I'm Andy Nichols, and I'm back with a review and recap episode show of a concert I saw last night with some friends. Last night, we went to go see Steve Hackett, formerly of Genesis in New York City, do Foxtrot at 50 and solo highlights. Foxtrot, the 1972 Genesis album. And he had not done that in full from start to finish. We've seen him do bits and pieces of it, especially Supper's Ready. But to hear the full album in the second set was really great. Couldn't pass it up. And whenever Hackett's in town, I always try to go. I have seen Steve Hackett, this is 8 times now since 2015. And he does not disappoint. True professional. And I went with a couple of friends, Ed and Bob. And I had Bob on as a guest, and he's going to join me to recap the show and the night into New York City. But I'm just really happy to see, and fortunate to see Steve Hackett, and have been blessed these last few years to have seen so many great concerts and Genesis at their last tour. But Steve Hackett, if you had told me 10 years ago, would evolve into be my favorite solo Genesis artist, I would have said, no, you're nuts. It's Phil or it's Peter. But Steve Hackett is clearly touched upon a nerve for me as a music fan and a prog rock fan. And he's a great show to watch. The music is dark. It's deep. It makes you think, and it's powerful, and that's what music's supposed to do. So we're going to bring on Mr. Bob Davison shortly and recap the show, and we'll see everybody next time. Thanks for tuning in. And here he is, yet again, the infamous Mr. Bob Davison. Hello, Bob. How are you tonight?
Doing very well. Very well.
There it is. There's the repressing, the 180-gram version. Look at that shiny thing of Foxtrot there. Look at that sharp.
Plays well.
Gatefold, right? It does play well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
I love the artwork.
Yeah, it's very it's different, you know. It's you know, you got all these foxes and these red outfits on horses on a beach. It's a little weird.
I don't know what the hell it means, but I don't care. The music's good.
It's decidedly English, isn't it?
Yes.
As
was the weather yesterday, by the way?
What's that?
As was the weather yesterday.
As was the weather yesterday. Man, here in the Northeast, we have just been inundated with weekend upon weekend of rain. And last night in New York City was no example of that. As Bob and I, for our third time now, have seen Steve Hackett. I did a little recounting of history here, and you and I saw Steve Hackett in March of 2020 on the eve of the shutdown at the Bergen Pack. We then saw him in April of 2022 at the Beacon Theater
with Tom
Hunyadi right after Beatlefest, and then you were supposed to go in December of 2022. You couldn't make it, but then you made it again last night. So you've seen in the last 4 years Steve Hackett 3 times, and last night was Foxtrot at 50. And what were your thoughts of the show overall?
Well, first, I hope there'll be a 4th and 5th time. That's how much I enjoyed the show. But just to set up the evening.
Oh yeah, please take us back to give us that Mike Francesa, Chris Russo delivery style of how it was. We know that. We know that.
We know this. As you were saying, it must have rained 2 inches in New York City yesterday, and we're from North Jersey. It was cold, it was damp, and I'll be honest with you, if you had called me at 4 o'clock and said, Bob, I'm just not up to it, can't do it tonight, I would have been disappointed, but not that disappointed. That's how bad the weather was. It was pretty crummy. So, but you are a serious rock and roller, a serious prog rock fan, so I knew that wasn't going to happen. So you and our good friend Persephone Ed picked me up about 5:30. And we headed into New York City in the pouring rain. Traffic was fine until we got to Manhattan, and just a dank, damp evening. And but as it turned out to be perfect for an English progressive rock icon like Steve Hackett.
It was, and to your earlier point, I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, it was a miserable day. I was busy earlier in the day with work. I'm going to be 100% honest. I was not feeling the show last night.
Yeah, I wasn't feeling it either until you picked me up. Then I start talking with you, Persephone Ed. You had some great Yes music on.
Yeah.
From some shows I think from 1996 that was absolutely stellar.
Yeah.
So that kind of got us in the mood as we got over there. You got a primo parking space.
Yeah.
An A plus on the parking space, half a block from the venue.
Which on a night like last night was damn. That was well worth it ahead of time.
And then the worms started to turn. As we got out of the car, I wouldn't say it cleared up, but it got a little nicer. It wasn't pouring, just a little misty. So we were able to have some outstanding grilled cheese sandwiches right out there in the middle of Times Square.
Right outside at a prop up stand, not a hot dog cart, but like an outdoor walk up place, and get some grilled cheese sandwiches because we tried a couple of venues as we got there. By the time we got into the city, it was 7:00 and parked. It was 7:00. Shows at 8, so we didn't have a whole lot of time. So we looked. Bob said, "What about that place?" And 2 grilled cheese sandwiches later, and I think Parsippany had a hot dog, and away we went.
Coca-Cola, some beer, and we ate standing up. So it was good.
Yeah. So
class for us.
Hey, nothing for a couple of guys from Jersey. Why not? No better way to do it. Let's talk about the venue that Steve Hackett played at last night, which, unbeknownst to me, but to you, is one of the oldest venues in New York and has a lot of history in it with the musicians that have played there, notably another favorite of ours in common. Please tell us about the Town Hall.
Yeah, well, it's an historic site. It's an absolutely beautiful theater, an old school theater. I believe it was built in 1919. It seats about 1,500 people. You were right on top of the stage, virtually wherever you sit. And they have had a lot of historical people play there. Charlie Parker, Billie Holiday, a lot of classical musicians through the years. A lot of speeches from there. Teddy Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, people like that through the years. And another favorite of ours, it was the first big stage appearance of Bob Dylan in 1963. Prior to that, he had only played stages in clubs. So it was his first big stage appearance. So there was a lot of history last night, and it was just a thoroughly enjoyable theater to be in.
Certainly was smaller than the Beacon, smaller. It definitely was an intimate venue. When you walked in there, and you could tell that it was older. The seats were a little older. The seats were older. The architecture was older. It was definitely an older type venue, and I had not been there. It was just off of Times Square between 6th and 7th, and great little hall.
Yeah.
So yeah, Hackett and all. I mean, all the time. Yeah, with all the times he's been in New York that I've seen him or we've seen him together, he's never played there. He's played the Nokia Theater. He's played downtown, smaller places, but never there. So
I think it's the perfect venue for him. I forget. Well, I won't mention the other venue we've been to the last couple of times. That's a little tight. It's difficult to actually get in there. You can't find the bathrooms.
Oh yeah,
the sound isn't the best.
True.
This was a much preferable venue.
And it was, and we took over/unders on the start time of the concert, did we not? And
we did.
We were both spot on. What'd we say?
Yeah.
8:05.
And just also, let me say this: every time I drive into a show with yourself and Parsippany Ed, I get a real education in rock and roll and a real education in the history of progressive music, because I'm not a track by track guy when it comes to Steve Hackett. I like Steve Hackett. I love his live shows. But I can't go track by track the way you and Ed can. It's a learning experience every time I go in. And then you guys are talking about the particulars of Yes shows from the 1990s that you were both at. That was another education.
Well, I think it's definitely not average. You have an above average interest in all this stuff, and you know the music pretty well, but maybe not to like a super hardcore level, right? But you know it pretty damn well.
I know it pretty well, but you know the various mixes through the years. You know who the third guitarist was on the 1992 recording of a Peter Gabriel concert in Japan. I don't know it at that level.
I know, and that did come up in conversation last night. Peter Gabriel, another favorite of ours, and author and a lot of this material, toured in our area, and we just did the cards were not in a line for us to see him this past fall, but hopefully we can because you have seen Peter Gabriel though. You have.
I have one of the best shows that I've ever seen. I think he's a stone cold genius, And it's odd, as well known as he is, and he's pretty well known, I also think he's dramatically underrated. I mean, I just think the guy is absolutely brilliant. His material with Genesis, his solo material, and even his recent album that he's been putting out one track at a time. I think it's great stuff. And, he appears still to be at the top of his game.
Mm. Yeah, so it's nice to see two of the guys that were kind of big foundational marks of early Genesis still out there and creating and producing and living in 2023 in their own venues and what they want to do. Gabriel clearly has been a successful solo artist much longer than he ever was a member of Genesis, which is why he probably doesn't include any of the Genesis material in his shows, much to the chagrin of people like us.
Yeah, and that of course is his choice, and I respect that. But the material that he did with Genesis, I think is really as good as anything he's ever done, and as good as anything in the history of progressive music. That and the stuff that Yes was putting out from that same period.
Sure, spot on. Thoughts about Steve Hackett being the guy to kind of carry the flame for that Genesis material. He's the only guy that in the band from that period that is doing it. Obviously, Genesis went on to much more commercial success after his departure, with Phil Collins kind of taking over and really, just sending them to the stratosphere. Steve Hackett stayed in Genesis for two more records after Peter Gabriel's departure. After The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway in '75. I got A Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering. And Steve Hackett, over the last 10 years, has really ignited that period of early Genesis and built up a following for himself. I mean, and he's a great solo artist, and he's got some really great solo records too. And he gives you half of his own stuff and a Genesis set in his shows. But clearly, the Genesis material is why he gets a draw, and it's people want to hear the music.
Well, I was there last night for the Genesis material, but I'll say this: I enjoyed his solo stuff just as much as I enjoyed Foxtrot.
You did?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way he's able to continue to carry the message from that period is, one, he's an absolutely brilliant, stunningly good guitar player. I mean, he's one of the greatest guitar players in the world. I don't think anyone would question that. And so there's that, right? And then I said two, but there's three things. And then secondly, he lived through that Genesis period. He was a member of the band. He co-wrote many of the songs. He was in the middle of it. So he knows what he's talking about. He knows the history. And then thirdly, and just as important as anything else, he's also very humble. I mean, he has hired top-notch musicians, and he allows them to shine. He does not insist on being the center of the show. Of course, he is the center of the show. He's Steve Hackett. He was in Genesis. All eyes are on him. But he has no problem letting the bass player, I think Rheingold was his name.
Jonas Rheingold, yep.
Rheingold shine. The gentleman who plays the flute and the clarinet and the organ, Townsend, I think his name was. On
the clarinet and sax is Rob Townsend, and the keyboardist is Roger King.
Right. And the drummer, I mean, Hackett lets all of them shine. And they really, and I think this is important, what makes the material successful, I think because of Hackett's relative lack of ego, particularly for a Rock Hall of Famer. He lets the band shine. So it's a band performance.
Right.
It wasn't just Steve up there, doing solos and whatever, which is fine. There's a place for that. But that's not what it was. It was a band show.
And he gave certain parts of the show. He had certain the members of the band had a moment to shine. Bass solo, drum solo, and he really is not. He is a front man, to your point, but he really lets everybody. And what a tight band! I mean, although some of you hear the bass pedals and some of the musicianship, is that not like professional musicians that he has playing, or what? I mean world class.
Yeah, world class. Right up there with the McCartney band, the Dylan band, a couple of the Prince shows that I saw. I mean, his musicians are top of the line, world class and can play with anybody.
There was a great moment in the show when we got to side 2 of Foxtrot. Side 2 of Foxtrot opens up with a little 2-minute acoustic song called Horizons, where it's just Steve and an acoustic guitar. Band leaves the stage, he plays his guitar before supper's ready, and you lean over and you said, that would have been good enough for me.
That was a drop the mic moment. I mean, just to see Steve sitting up there with the acoustic guitar, you just see how gifted he is. And you can also see that he underplays in order to get the music across. I mean, he did that with ease. He was not showing off.
No.
No, it just something, it was back in the day, it was like watching Tom Seaver pitch. I mean,
Yeah.
He's that good.
He's got an ability with the guitar to like make it wail and cry with his playing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, he gets in addition to being a spectacular player, he has a unique sound. When you hear him play, you know it's Steve Hackett. Similar to George Harrison, Jimi Hendrix, guys like that.
Yeah.
I usually don't mention guitarists with those other two guys, but he's at that level, in my humble opinion.
He is, and I agree with you, and I wish that the writers, the people that write in these lists and stuff like that, would recognize some of these progressive rock guitarists. They're on those lists, but they're usually like 130 or 140, and people like Hackett, that's criminally low.
Yeah. And when you see him live, you really, I mean, there's a bluesy element to what he does. There's a jazz element to what he does. I mean, he really incorporates a lot of different sounds.
Yeah.
And
you hear it. You hear bluesy stuff. You hear jazzy stuff. You hear progressive stuff. You hear it all. You hear it all in a lot of this music. And then Persephone Ed made the comment too, and I think it's pretty fair that there is a darker element to a lot of this music. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There is a darker. It's not where music is very optimistic and bright, and some of Genesis and Hackett's music is, but by and large, a lot of it does go to a darker place that is a little bit more mysterious, a little more thought provoking, and just slightly darker than say. Yes, or even ELP.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Hackett's material and the best Genesis material under Peter Gabriel has no interest in saving the world. That's okay. There's a place for that. I'm okay with that too. But Hackett is very English. I think. It can be very dark, and it really matched the evening last night. By the way, the weather.
It really did. I tell you, for a man who is 72, he really looks good.
He does. Well, obviously he stays in shape. He was kidding with the audience because I guess he smelled the marijuana smoke coming in. He was kidding with the audience that had used marijuana, but he made a point of saying that he had not, because he could not do what he does.
Right.
If he did that.
He's
obviously a man who's taking care of himself, and good for him.
Absolutely. So into the album proper, you've seen him do Selling England by the Pound. You've now seen him do Foxtrot. We haven't seen him do The Lamb yet. Next year, he is rumored to be doing a tour, and he's not going to do the whole Lamb album because we've seen that show. It's massive. He's going to do a highlight show of The Lamb next year. But what you've seen so far, what did you prefer, Selling England by the Pound or Foxtrot? Or is it they were both great. I mean,
well, they were both great, but different in this way. When I saw Selling England by the Pound, I had, of course, heard of Steve Hackett. I knew who he was. I had heard that record, but I went there really with no expectations. I just figured I'd go see a good show with my friend Andy. So we went to that show. It was at the Inglewood Performing Arts Center. Was that where it was?
Correct.
Right. I was absolutely blown away. I was stunned at how good it was. And I was stunned at what a good guitar player that he was. I just didn't realize he was that good. So that show will always be seared in my memory. Having said that, last night we had better seats, and he seemed to be more for lack of a better way of putting it, on top of his game and more invested in the material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so because Foxtrot, well, obviously Supper's Ready, which is the penultimate track on Foxtrot. It's Genesis's version of Close to the Edge. It's 22 minutes long. That's been in Steve's set list for quite a while. His band knows it. It's one of the big reasons why people go to see him. However, the rest of the album is something that he's not really played in full. Things like Timetable and Get Him Out by Friday and Can Utility and the Coastliners. And so he probably wanted to do that material justice because he did not regularly play it, to play it, especially side A.
And one of the previous shows we had seen him do Supper's Ready, and that was great, and it was great last night. But it was really good to see him do side A last night because I hadn't heard that.
Right. So, I mean, the album opens up with those kind of classic 70s organs, right? Dark, Watch Where the Sky is perfect, right. And Timetable, which is a favorite of mine as well. And, lyrically, this is, it's Gabriel. It's all of them, really, because the band was very democratic at that time. It wasn't one person writing all the lyrics. It was Banks. It was really Banks and Gabriel writing the lion's share of the lyrics then. So, it's decidedly English. These are outside of Steve Hackett and Phil Collins were the public school guys. The rest of the those guys in Genesis all grew up and went to, private school. So I know sometimes Genesis music, especially the early 70s music, gets to be labeled as a little pretentious because they were kind of upper class guys. They were not working class guys like Liverpool. What are your thoughts on that and the direction of the music because of their background and how Collins and Hackett maybe offshot that a little bit because they were outside of that norm, right, society-wise?
I mean, certainly the early Genesis with Hackett and Peter Gabriel, there is an intellectual quality to it. There's a highbrow quality to it. I mean, I don't experience it as pretentious. I mean, everyone is who they are. They went to those particular schools. That's how they were educated. That was the circles that they traveled in. If that's what it took to produce the sound that they were able to produce, it's okay with me. I mean, everyone doesn't have to be the Beatles from Liverpool, being willing to fight if they have to.
Right.
Or, the Bad Boys, the Who, and the Rolling Stones. Everyone doesn't have to be that.
No.
I love that music too.
Right. It's just a different way. It's a different culture. It's a different class system from which the music was allowed to be emerged. They were able to, especially where popular music had evolved there in the late 60s when Genesis came together, bands were sprouting up all over the place in England. So based because of the success of the earlier bands, the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, so forth. So bands like Crimson and Yes and Genesis were, okay, you want to be a band? Well, we know that this is a successful model. Bands, it's a good business, music, right? So you want to try to be creative and write something far out that's 10 minutes long? We may not know what you're talking about, but if it sells records, by all means, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I also think Genesis realized on some level that they needed to be who they were. If they tried to be the Who or the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Kinks, that was not who they were. I don't know a lot about their backgrounds, but obviously they listened to a lot of classical music wherever they came from.
Yeah.
I mean, because you could hear that throughout their material as well. And as I understand the history of the Beatles, Lennon and McCartney were not sitting around listening to classical music.
No.
Whereas the guys in Genesis clearly were.
Yeah, they definitely, the music had a kind of a Renaissance feel to it.
Right.
Medieval feel to it, a lot of it too. So, and that's not everybody's cup of tea, but man, they know how to rock out well. We talked about this. I wanted to show it on the show tonight. Check this out.
Oh, there it is.
Right, little patch that was good.
Tremendous, and that was an insert in one of the Foxtrot's albums that you purchased.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the 3 or 4 copies that I have, yeah. But some of this was probably on a denim jacket there in the 70s. And it's a funny story about the dress and the fox head. Are you familiar with that? Why?
No, I am not.
So, again, kind of taking a page out of the anybody who was a front man wanted to get attention. And, back in the 70s, how did you do it? Elton John did it by kicking over pianos at the Troubadour. And, Peter Gabriel was a front man. He didn't play an instrument. So he got his wife's red dress and a fox's head and came out on stage at a concert and wore this.
That'll do it. You're going to get attention doing that.
And all the musical papers, the NME and Melody Maker, all wrote, okay, look at Genesis. Look at this guy Gabriel coming out on stage in a red dress and a fox head. So that visually, back in the day, was how. So that became, okay, that's that's who they are. And obviously they marketed it and branded it. And, here they are with a classic album from the early 70s. But it's just interesting the lengths that somebody has to go to kind of get attention back then,
And it seems as if the album has held up really well. I mean, it's probably more popular now than it was upon its release.
I would say so. I would say the advent of I think we owe a debt of gratitude to Steve Hackett for that, for keeping the music alive.
Yeah, for bringing the show back out on the road.
We saw a couple kids in the audience last night, did we not?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, we saw a kid about 10. We saw some teenagers. And, just a couple of words on the audience. The one thing I've noticed, and I remember this from the old Yes shows I used to go to back in the day, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer shows and King Crimson and those bands. The progressive rock fan audience is as well educated as any fan base I've ever seen. You go see a progressive rock show, and the audience is all in. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They're familiar with the material, and they're there to experience the show. You don't see too many casual fans wandering in to a progressive rock show.
And you largely, by and large, don't see people dancing in the aisles and yelling and screaming and being, like a typical like amateur night at MetLife.
Yeah, no, you don't get any nonsense. I remember back in the day, actually being scared at some shows. But, you don't get that with early Genesis. And yes, we certainly didn't have it last night.
No, and you watch. I mean, when the show is on, right? Everybody in that that auditorium in that theater was seated and focused on the music and listening.
No one's screwing around on their phones.
No.
The bar's not mobbed. People aren't, smoking whatever. They're there for the show.
And that's evident whenever we've gone to a show like this. It's pretty much the audience is locked in and educated on it. And they want to hear the music and be entertained. They're not distracted, and I think that goes for us as well too when we're there. Every time we've gone, we've never walked away from a Steve Hackett show saying, "Oh, that was okay." It's always been great.
No, the guy's brilliant, and I thought in particular his performance of Spectral Mornings.
Yes,
that just blew me away. I just thought that was stunning, and that probably more than any other song last night is going to stay with me for a while.
Yes,
yeah.
It has that effect on it when you hear that, and I'm glad that you appreciated that one. Now, you knew of that, you heard that song before, right? Or you had not?
Yeah.
Right, but to hear it live in that context is
to hear it live in Devil's Cathedral. Is that the name of the other?
Yes.
Yeah, he rocked that out. I mean, he rocked it hard.
And then he closed the first set with that. So it's a song from his first album called Voyage of the Acolyte, and it's called Shadow of the Hierophant, and it's about a 12-minute track. He only played the second half of it, so he closed the first half of that set. That's that one number where the pounding bass pedals that repeated over and over and over again, and like basically shook the place, right? And then so he always does a great job with that.
And he absolutely, if I recall it correctly, he absolutely lit it up on the guitar.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it was jaw-dropping.
Yeah. He knows who he's playing to. He's playing to an audience that largely wants to hear Genesis material, but also want to hear his own stuff. So he gives you 45, 50 minutes of his own material, takes a break, and comes out and does a Genesis set. And he's got a good formula and a good format, and God, I hope he continues to do it so we can keep seeing him.
I recall the closing song that you're referring to of the first set. I'm sitting there watching him. I started looking around like, is there a second guitar up there? Just the sound that he was getting out of by himself.
By himself.
Yeah.
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 That is just a monstrous piece of music, you know. It just to close it out, and that was only even half the song.
Right.
But and it's strategically well placed too at the end of the first set. You know, after he's shaking your body to its core, he takes you for a break and says, "Okay, we'll be back. Go get a drink, and we'll come back out with Foxtrot." And you're like,
and this may be a little picky, but his break wasn't too long either.
No. Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes, and he was back, and that's enough. I kind of don't like when they disappear for a half hour, 45 minutes. You know, stay in the show.
Stay in the show, right? Give 2 hours, give us 2.5, and let's go. Yeah,
right. You know, don't stretch it out so we could buy merchandise and
which we didn't last night. We usually do, but we did not.
Right. The couple of times I looked, it was quite a line.
Yeah, and we weren't doing lines last night. We couldn't do it.
Lines. We were cold and damp by the time we got there. So.
That's right. Well, Bob, it was a pleasure recounting our rainy, wet night in New York City, but to see a legend again for the third time with you and I, to see him, and I can't wait to do it again.
Well, fingers crossed we get highlights from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway next year, because that would be awesome.
Yeah, for 2024, 50 years since The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, I would think that that would be a New York City venue, and we'll be there again.
On Broadway, he might do it at the Town Hall again, so I'm looking forward to that.
Well, we will keep our eyes posted for that. Well, Bob Davison, always a pleasure having you on my podcast. Thanks so much for coming on and spending a few minutes tonight.
Thank you, Andy. Rock on.
Okay, talk to you soon, Bob. Take care.